Shri Rajeev Chandrasekhar.
Sir, our economy is only beginning to recover from several years of decline and drift. And as the Finance Minister is aware, sir, I have repeatedly argued in Parliament and outside that our economy and government need significant reforms and changes for a complete transformation and for it to recover and grow sustainably. Having well-regulated, free and competitive financial markets is one important part of that. Sir, I had last spoken about this subject in 2010 when the House was debating the Securities and Insurance Law Amendment and Validation Bill, where I had raised the issue of the decline of independent regulation of the financial sector. Over the last few years, sir, as many of my colleagues have pointed out, we have witnessed a spate of scams and crises that have their roots in regulatory failure or incapacity. These have in turn caused serious setbacks to investor and consumer confidence in many areas that still need investment and growth. So, sir, this bill that strengthens the security regulator SEBI is very welcome. I only hope, sir, and I hope the Finance Minister makes this the first step of a review and strengthening of the complete spectrum of independent economic regulators, because, sir, I believe these institutions, more than any other single governance action, will impact the ability of our country to attract long-term investments. And as my colleague said, sir, the Parliament has not spent enough time reviewing the acts and performance of most of these regulators. So the issue of accountability is an important one before we discuss powers that are to be granted to regulators. I strongly believe, sir, and many honorable members have echoed this today, that the banking regulator, for example, needs to explain why it blandly oversaw the unprecedented concentration of risk, where 9 to 10 industrial groups have accounted for 95% of the banking system's net worth, creating a too large to fail situation and putting taxpayers and owners of the public sector banks at risk for the performance of these groups. The stock market also, sir, similarly, is increasingly becoming a playground for laundering money and is reportedly seeing many insider trading linked transactions linked to either takeovers or M&As. It is in this background and context we are discussing the strengthening of the stock market and securities regulator SEBI. Sir, coming to this bill, the SEBI has in recent times redeemed itself partially with assertive action on insider trading and collective investment schemes. This amendment is primarily to cover the regulatory gap and vacuum that exists vis-a-vis the CISs. There have been many instances where investment schemes have managed investors' funds or depositors' funds without supervision of SEBI or any other regulator, and that has been the call from investors to strengthen SEBI. So let me just quickly raise a few issues relating to this bill, sir. Under Clause 3, SEBI would regulate all schemes with a corpus of 100 crores or more. So I strongly believe this should be caveated by the corpus or the number of investors. It should be 100 crores or 500 investors or as appropriate number that you consider. Sir, there is also an issue of the new definition of CIS. Is this definition too large? And will it cover normal FMCG companies that raise deposits from their dealers, for example? And therefore, is there a need to make sure that the definition is not something that is so large and creates harassment and problems for legitimate businesses? Especially, sir, this is on Clause 11A2. This provision should be considered in the light of the fact that only one CIS has been registered with SEBI since 1999, and that CIS also is yet to launch a scheme. I would therefore like the government to clarify this issue, even though I do believe it is better to over-regulate on behalf of the investors rather than not have any protection for them, as has been the case for the last few years. Sir, on the issue of powers, in the process of giving powers to regulators to prosecute criminal elements, sir, I'm just going to quickly, give me one more minute, sir. One moment, I need 1 minute. So I'll quickly run through three issues, sir. This bill correctly provides a safeguard in terms of search and seizure by making a magistrate's approval required. So I think that principle should also apply for attachment, because attachments create a very disorderly exit for investments and disruption of jobs. I think since there is a special court, it may be a good idea to amend that clause to ensure that attachments are also sought after magistrate approval, sir. Sir, clause 15 in the original act and sub-clauses 6 to 15 in the bill is about penalties. I think the penalties are not punitive enough, and I propose that it should be raised from 1 lakh and 1 crore to 5 lakhs and 5 crores. So finally, to the issue of transparency in the functioning of SEBI, regulators like SEBI are being granted increasing powers, just half a minute more, sir, increasing powers by Parliament, assuming that these powers would be exercised in the interest of investors and the economy. But there will always be a temptation to misuse this power. So therefore, I am suggesting a clause amendment in clause 17, or indeed have a new clause that ensures all consent agreements and cases are transparently disclosed, along with scores on the SEBI website, instead of it being only kept secret, sir. This must be made legal and binding on SEBI as part of its obligation to be transparent. So I hope these amendments will be considered by the government to make the bill and SEBI more effective and more accountable, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Dhanyavad.